Hello everyone, good afternoon. Welcome to today's Lunch and Learn. My name's Amanda Fall. I'm the Advisor Community Manager here at Enterprise Nation and your host every Thursday. This week I'm quite excited because we're talking about a subject that I think a lot of people are interested in, but it's one of those where it seems like really impossible to get started. We're going to be looking at how do you get started with podcasting. Very popular. We know it's continuing to grow. So we'll be working through kind of the myths and mistakes, and I'll be speaking with Ollie Collard, who is founder of Enterprise Nation.
No, it's Emma.
Enterprise Orchard and podcaster at Founded and Grounded. I'll introduce Ollie in a moment, but just for new listeners, just to let you know, this is being recorded. We'll share a recording later today. So if you want to play back, you can catch everything later on. How it's going to work, we've got 30 minutes together. We'll finish around 12:30. I've got some questions for Ollie, but as always, there is a chat box and question box, and we do encourage you to put in your comments, ask questions. Hopefully we'll get through a lot of it with the questions between me and Ollie, but if there's anything we haven't answered, feel free to ask. And if we don't have time, we are going to also share how you can get in touch with Ollie, and I encourage you to connect with him and ask him then. So that's enough from me. Ollie, thanks so much for joining today, and it's great to have you on this, discussing this topic, but it'd be great if you could tell everyone a little bit more about what you do at Enterprise Orchard.
Fantastic. Amanda, thank you so much for the kind intro. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here for this Lunch and Learn. So I'm Ollie, I'm an advisor with Enterprise Nation, and it's great to see so many Enterprise Nation members here today. Disclaimer, first of all, I'm not a podcast expert. I mean, if I can do it, I think anyone else can do it. So my goal for the next 30 minutes is simply to make just one person believe in themselves and take action and launch their podcast. I'm not selling any podcasting services, but a bit more about me. So as Amanda said, I'm founder of Enterprise Orchard. We help first-time founders start and grow rewarding businesses. Since 2018, we've helped over 200 people make their ideas and turn them into a reality. I'm also co-founder of Founded and Grounded, which is a podcast that provides reality, reassurance, and inspiration for the startup community. So why did we start the podcast? I think that's always a good question. We believe the world of startups has been made to look a bit too glamorous and sexy from the outside looking in. We really wanted to create a podcast that shed light on the kind of honest stories about what it's really like to run a business. So people go into business for the right reasons, and they go into business with both of their eyes open. So that's the reason we started. Just a little bit about the podcast. We're in 65 countries now. We've been going for about a year and a half. We were lucky enough to be featured on BBC Radio last year, which was a great experience. We have a meeting tomorrow about a second sponsorship deal as well. And we're basically just making it up as we go along and sort of dealing with all of the challenges that get brought our way. On a personal level, I'm a Bristolian, where me and my wife live, and we've got 2 young kids as well, a boy and a girl. Interesting fact about me, I was actually born in India. My mum helped set up a fair trade clothing business in the 1980s. And I've been lucky enough to go back on several occasions. And I think that's why I've kind of seen firsthand what difference business can make to both people and communities. And that's why I'm so passionate about business and helping people. But that's enough about me. Let's get back to the podcasting. And I know, Amanda, you've got some questions that you're going to ask.
Yeah, well, I love the fact about yourself. Not many people kind of share one of those, but it makes so much sense, your journey and what you do now, having that background with your mother, and how that, you want to now help other people create businesses that hopefully, as you said, have a purpose as well. And yeah, I should have said at the start that obviously that this is not your core business, but as we've talked about in other sessions on Enterprise Nation, different avenues to reach new audiences, and podcasting is definitely one of those. And I'm sure you'll touch on it with my first question, but that it's also a possible revenue stream, depending on what your goal is with podcasting. So that's kind of my first question. Why should anyone who's listening consider starting a podcast?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I mean, first of all, it's one of the fastest growing mediums in the world, which is a great opportunity that's having exponential growth year upon year. As you talked about, there are potential revenue streams to explore, but that does come later down the line. I think when you're really starting out, your core goal shouldn't be about obviously advertising revenue. It should be about creating great content. But as you say, it is a potential revenue stream later down the line. I think podcasting advertising revenue is expected to exceed 1 billion this year. But why should you start there? I think one of the first reasons is it's a really good opportunity to position yourself as an expert in your field. If you've got something that you're really passionate about and you've got a really strong niche, then podcasting is a great way to strategically position yourself as an expert in your field, and also an opportunity to provide value to your prospect customers before you've even got to know them, and show your authority. So I'd say that's one of the top points. The second point is I just wanted to touch upon, I've got a quick bit of paper here. It's something called the 7-11-4 rule. Sorry, that's my microphone just popping up. So Google did a bit of research called the 0 moment of truth. So in traditional marketing, there's normally 2 moments of truth. So the first one is when you see a product or service for the first time on, say, a supermarket shelf, as an example. The second moment of truth is when you experience a product or service. So as an example, if you've just eaten a product, a new chocolate bar as an example, that's the second moment of truth. Now, Google's research identified this 0 moment of truth that comes before both of those. And essentially what they're saying is this is where consumers do their research. So generally speaking, consumers spend 7 hours researching a business before even considering to make a purchasing decision. So podcasting is a great way of increasing those number of hours that you can send to a potential prospect customer for them to get to know you. So 7 hours of content, you've got 11 different touch points. So it could be a blog, a podcast, a video, and then the number 4 is 4 locations before making a purchase. So I think podcasting is a great way of increasing those number of hours of content that you're producing and get consumers to listen to the content. I think as well, podcasting is just a great excuse to contact amazing people. Like some of the people we've had on the podcast have turned into great relationships, some of them even friends. And it's just a great way to have fun as well. So I think those are kind of the top reasons for me anyway that I'd share to get started.
Yeah, that Google research, I have seen those figures, and I've kind of never really had it spelled out to me before. But interesting what you just said. I spoke to someone today about how do you shortcut that time, the 7 touch points. So that seems like quite a lot to anyone. And you having a one-to-one is often a way to really increase someone's kind of engagement and maybe shortcut some of those steps because they've really connected with you. And I guess podcasting is making yourself accessible to people in a different way rather than a blog or other ways. So obviously doing webinars, these sorts of things. So it's one of those, but maybe it also helps compress that time that you have to wait for someone to kind of make that decision. Absolutely love that. And you've picked up a really good point as well about, and I'm thinking, if someone's thinking, what should I talk about? You clearly I'm not sure if you mentioned what Founded and Grounded actually covers, but clearly it's about speaking with other founders, which connects back to your business. Is that kind of how you thought, what should we actually do a podcast on?
Yeah, and we wanted to really engage with founders at an earlier stage. I think there's some really good podcasts out there that, are speaking to really successful people. But I think people feel a bit disconnected from that level of achievement versus just kind of getting started. So I think that's the reason why we started the podcast. So just to share a brief bit about it. So how we do it is, well, before COVID, I used to go out and meet with people and interview them there and then. Obviously, since COVID, we're obviously doing all of that remotely now. But how the podcast works, we wanted to make it a bit different than other podcasts. So what we do is we play snippets of the podcast. So the first section is about the origin story, about how they got started. The middle part is about their challenges that they faced in their business. And then the third part is around the future and one piece of advice they'd pass on to somebody thinking of starting a business. But between each snippet, let me just show you this actually, it really makes more sense. I'll just hold this up if people can see that. So this is how we break down the show. It's generally around 40 minutes. So we've got the intro, which is around 5 minutes, the origin story, which is kind of 10 minutes, the analysis around that, the challenges, which is part 2, and then the future, which is about 5 minutes, and then again a wrap up of analysis of that for another 5 minutes. And what that does is it breaks up the audio experience. So rather than just me having a one-on-one conversation with somebody else, it really breaks up that conversation between me and my co-host Andrew, who's got the most amazing voice, actually, a very warm voice. If anyone's listened to the show, you'll know what I mean. So I think kind of just doing something a bit different and believing in what you're doing is so fundamentally important.
Yeah, very sophisticated slides today as well. Love it. Even though we couldn't get ours to work. So now I guess people are inspired, and I think even just thinking about scripting, and that's almost another topic in itself. But what would you say are some of the common pitfalls or mistakes people make when trying to get started with podcasting?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Amanda. And I think there's a few reasons. I think sometimes people feel a bit overwhelmed about everything that they need to do. So I think the first thing is just not knowing where to start. So I think the first thing that you can do, I'll probably come on to that in a bit, but I think one of the first pitfalls is not having a clearly defined audience. So what I would encourage people to do is go out and do a bit of market research about who is your audience, create a customer persona or listener persona, as we call it in the industry, and really have a kind of purpose, a goal, a mission about what your podcast is aiming to do, and then structure it. So create an audio plan, something very basic like this, doesn't have to be complicated, and just create a bit of a plan around it. I think sometimes consistency is really key with these things. So the second thing I'd say is think about the time commitments that it's going to take you. I'd say between us, it takes about 12 hours to do a single episode. We've obviously taken the decision to do it in partnership. So Andrew Parsonage and I are kind of the main hosts of the show. And then we brought on Freya last summer to do the marketing side of things. And obviously there's a bit of a division of labour there between the three of us, which definitely helps. But do think about the opportunity cost. Like, is that 10 to 12 hours best spent creating a podcast, or is that best leveraging something else? So it's just something to think about, really, is the time commitment of starting a podcast. Then I'd say another pitfall is just not being consistent. So I would say decide before you launch how often you want to publish an episode. We publish every 2 weeks. We've generally stuck to that. I think when COVID hit, we probably had a bit of a wobble. But yeah, we kind of stick to producing an episode every 2 weeks, which is important so our listeners know that they can expect an episode. We do have a little break in summer, but we make that very clear to our audience that we aren't publishing in the summer, and we still market the kind of back catalogue of episodes as well. So I think consistency really helps, and that also builds momentum. So I think just think about being consistent and building that momentum. And then the last point, the last pitfall I'd like to touch upon is think about it from the listener's perspective. It's not all about you and your guests. Think about their listening experience. And I think if you're really thinking about that, then you're going to create some great content.
Yeah, brilliant. 10 hours, I guess, like you said, that's a really good point of kind of thinking, if time is quite precious, but then I suppose it's the longevity or how you use it after. So it's, thinking about what comes next. So having a marketing plan around it. So it's not just it goes into the ether, you actually have a plan to use that in multiple ways to make that worth it.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually, Amanda, because obviously when you've got the final show, ours is around 40 minutes. Obviously, show length varies, but it is about repurposing of that content. So what you can do is recreate things called audiograms, which are basically short videos using the audio with a picture and then transcribing what they're saying on the screen. So if you look at any of our kind of social channels on Founded and Grounded, you will see regular audiograms that are being created. There's a tool called Headliner, which is really good to do that, which I'd highly recommend. Also, you can take quotes from that and share it on social media. You can obviously transcribe it and make blogs. You can get your audience to share it. So there's a wealth of marketing that you can do once you've got the episode published.
Yeah, good point. I am going to slip in a little comment because it came into my mind as well from Elizabeth. She said she's interested in starting a podcast at some point, but she wonders whether Clubhouse will still steal some of that audience. In your experience as a podcaster, what do you think?
It's a really good question, actually. And I know Clubhouse has experienced amazing growth since it came out earlier in the year. I'm not actually on it. I'm on Android, so I was kind of waiting for it to be released on Android. I kept thinking, oh, should I, just join on my iPad? And then I thought they're surely bringing out an Android version soon. So I kind of haven't got involved with it. I think that podcasting is more accessible, I would say. I think a lot of it isn't live as well. So I think it is easier to record content for podcasting versus doing live streaming on Clubhouse. But yeah, obviously, if you're looking to get started in audio, then it might be a decision between the two. I'm not sure how long the Clubhouse bubble will stay around for. It might continue to grow and grow. But yeah, I would get involved with podcasting. But that's just my opinion.
Yeah, really good points. And I think obviously it's not, as you said, accessible to everyone. I know people who bought cheap iPhones just so they could get on Clubhouse. And also I think it's hosted on more platforms, which I know you'll share at some point, where you can actually host your podcast. So, and I think the point you just made earlier about, you've got this content now, it's recorded, it lives somewhere, and you can keep using it again. Whereas an event, they're brilliant. Yes, they connect you with people, but then that disappears. So
yeah. And just to add one more thing to that, Amanda, obviously, in terms of if you create a basic website as well, on your hosting platform, you also have a website there. So in terms of backlinks for your own website, it really helps with your own SEO as well. So that might be a reason to do that over potentially Clubhouse as well.
Yeah, and you can share it other places, like you just put it on Enterprise Nation. So I was listening to that today. So yeah, again, it's that kind of integration, and as you said, it's good for SEO. So now let's move on to the practicals. We've talked about some of the challenges and obviously why you should do it, but in your could you share some kind of really practical steps for just getting started?
Yeah, sure. I think the first thing is to do some market research. So go out and listen to other podcasts that interest you. Take some notes about how they're structured, what are the key takeaways, how they do it, and just write down a kind of bit of an analysis about them. So do some kind of competitor research. I then think the best next step is to do some primary research yourself. So do something basic like a SurveyMonkey type form, whatever platform you want to use, and go out and engage with your potential listener base and ask them questions about whether they listen to podcasts, how long they like a podcast show to last for, what proposed areas of topics that you're going to be discussing, the types of guests that they'd be interested in listening to. So really go out and do that kind of market research. I think then think about, if you are obviously having guests on the show, think about the types of guests that you want to engage. A great way to kind of engage people is on LinkedIn. I think if you're going out there and kind of bigging up people's egos, that sometimes helps in terms of attracting them onto the show. Obviously, when you haven't launched and you're trying to get them on the show, is a bit of a kind of difficult ground there. But I think if you start with people that you know really well, and then I'm sure that they'll be willing to do you a favour to come on the show to get your kind of pilot episodes out there. Obviously, you've got to source some things like music, jingles. There's a slide in a minute that we'll pull up, which I'll go into a bit more detail on that on. And then think about a name. There's so many similarities between starting a podcast and starting a business, but you do have to think about, what is a podcast going to be, a brand, graphic design, get started with something basic like using Canva. I wouldn't put any money into it, but think about your name. I think with naming, sometimes go for the Ron Seal approach. So do what it says on the tin. I think sometimes that's a better way of doing things. Obviously, you can buy some very basic equipment, but I would highly recommend people not spending a lot of money in the upfront investment phase. I think you can get started with what you have. So I think those are kind of some practical things that you can do straight away to kind of get a pilot episode out there. Hopefully that helps.
And I think, yeah, thanks for kind of covering the thought process before. And Anna, my colleague, if you could put the slide up so people can kind of start looking at, we've got a few questions about the tech, and the platforms you use. So hopefully that will, kind of, people can look at that, and we'll share this afterwards. In terms of, I guess, yeah, we've kind of talked about the pitfalls, but what are some things that you've particularly learned since launching that you can share with everyone?
Yeah, I mean, we've made all the mistakes along the way, so happy to share our learnings. Coming back to what I said before, I think if you treat it like you're launching a business, then that's going to put you in good stead. I know we've got lots of business owners already engaged and hopefully listening to this show. So treat it like a business, first of all. Be clear on your target audience and what your niche is. And I'd say don't overinvest in those kind of sunk costs. You can buy better equipment later down the line. I would highly encourage you just to get started and start small. Also, coming back to the timing issue. So if you've got 1 hour of kind of raw content, that's going to take about 5 to 6 hours to be edited. So just think about that when you're recording interviews with your guests. Some people obviously love to speak, but I would encourage you to try and make them give succinct answers, simply because it makes the job of editing a lot harder. I actually don't do our editing. My business partner Andrew does that bit. So sometimes if I've had an interview that's gone on for over an hour, he's not happy with me, basically. So I'd encourage you to try and keep the interviews quite short and succinct. Kind of tips for kind of recording the interviews: make sure you have some water so you don't get a dry throat. If you're doing it, in the future in person, hopefully, use kind of sign language to communicate. I found when somebody's giving an answer and I'm like really agreeing with them. I'm like saying, yeah, and making all these stupid noises. And then Andrew's got to try and take that out from the audio. So use sign language to communicate when you're speaking with them. Like if they're going on for too long, maybe just put your hand up or something simple like that. Or if like you're really liking the point and you want them to go on, use a thumbs up. Also try and do it standing up. It kind of helps projecting your voice and stuff like that. So I'd encourage you to try and do it standing up. Obviously smile, be friendly. What you want to do is put your guests at ease. So make them feel comfortable, ask lots of open-ended questions. And sometimes the power of a pause is very important as well. So something to think about. But my kind of main takeaways, just get started. I think when we were talking about launching our podcast, we spent probably about a year talking about it. I wish we just got started sooner. And my promise to you is that once you get started, you'll look back on that and think, what was I so worried about? It's just better to get started. And I think, like anything in life, it does take time and hard work, but the results will show from that. And just be consistent. That would be my kind of overarching advice.
Yeah, great. And I think you get better with time. I remember when we started these lunch and learns last summer, I was a bit terrified and I really went from a script and all and then after a while you just get used to it and then you know what works and you get to know your audience as well. And I've got a few questions. I know we've got a little bit of kind of short on time. Just quickly, was there another slide you had, Ollie?
Sorry, do you want me to run through them quickly?
No, I was just to see if we want to make sure that one goes up as well. I thought you had maybe two.
There is a second slide, sorry, yeah.
Anna, if you could just switch to that one, that would be great. There you go. So if people are looking at what do you use to edit, if you want to try and edit, I used to do a bit editing myself, so I've done Audacity. It does take a while to learn, so or you can outsource that kind of thing to people who are much better at it. And I think it was just, I would love to ask, just because if people are thinking I'm recording, I'm using a mic, but yeah, what do you use to record with your guests? Do you call them? Do you use Zoom? That's a really practical, just out of interest.
Great question. Yeah, great question, Amanda. We started out trialing all of them. So we started with Zoom, but the audio quality wasn't very good. We then looked at Zencaster, which was quite good. But the issue was that you couldn't mix the audio files together. So it records both guests locally. So wherever they are and you are, it records them separately, but then you couldn't mix the two together. So we moved on to Squadcast, which I would highly recommend. It's about $10 a month, but the audio quality is great, and you can mix the audio files together afterwards. Also, a top tip for doing it is actually turn off the cameras when you're recording, because the bandwidth is then increased and the audio does improve.
Gosh, that's useful. I've never heard of Squadcast, but that's, yeah, because I'm probably like everyone listening, know I should be doing a podcast myself. And I've deliberated over it for probably a year as well. So I think
get started, Amanda. Come on.
Well, I do these every week, so I figure that ticks the box. True. But I think there's a personal interest, where you're like, well, yeah, just get started. So I will be looking back at your slides as well. Well, I think we're kind of out of time, but I think there may be a few little questions, but I think best for those to connect with you, Ollie, and we'll share as well your podcast. It's great. It's on Enterprise Nation, but yeah, I guess the kind of classic, where can people find you, Ollie?
Of course, yeah. So Founded and Grounded, first of all, the podcast is on all major platforms, so obviously Apple Podcasts, Spotify, etc. We host ours on something called Buzzsprout, and basically once you've got it on there, you list it as a directory on all of the other channels. So it's really easy to do using Buzzsprout. It is about $10 a month, but they've got a great Facebook group as well and community that's really helpful. So that's Founded and Grounded. We're also on social channels. Search Founded and Grounded on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn and Facebook. And then Enterprise Orchard is enterpriseorchard.co.uk. And you can find me under LinkedIn, Ollie Collard.
Great. And you're on Enterprise Nation. We'll share how to connect with you there. And you have also some of the programs that you help with founders. So lots of founders listening. Obviously, there's the podcast, and then there's what you do to help them grow their business. So thanks, Ollie. That was so good. We crammed a lot into 30 minutes, and lots of really nice feedback on the comments. So I think hopefully we'll see people starting podcasts in the next month or so.
Amazing. Yeah, I'd love to see it. Thanks so much for the opportunity, Amanda. Just to say, if anyone wants to email me directly, my email is ollie@enterpriseorchard.co.uk. And I'd love to hear your questions and help you get started.
Great. All right. Have a great day, everyone. And I'll see you next week. Bye.